You're listening to the Nutrition Experts Podcast, featuring guests who take the scientific talk about food and break it down for practical use. You've heard the phrase, "You are what you eat." Come find out what that really means. Experience conversations with experts in the field of nutrition and understand the power of food for our health, well-being, and beyond. Now, here's your host, registered dietitian and nutritionist, Mathea Ford.
Good morning. We're here today with Jenny Eden Berk of JennyEdenCoaching.com. And today we're going to talk with her a lot about the mind-body connection and how things work. And she works with people for different types of things. So Jenny, tell us what you do and what interests you about the work that you do.
Yeah, I absolutely love the work that I'm doing. So I'm an eating psychology coach, and what I do is I help women and men and teenagers too, to really heal their relationship with food and with their bodies. So many people are confused and just frustrated, and they're listening to experts who change their mind all the time. And people are left wondering, how the heck should I nourish myself? They don't know what to do. And I help people sort of tap back into intrinsic wisdom and to help them to make choices that really fuel their bodies, gives them joy and pleasure and awareness, which makes a big impact on metabolism and stress response and assimilation of nutrients and all different other kinds of things. And I also work with people on body image. It's a topic near and dear to my heart. So, I just absolutely love what I do. It's very rewarding to help people in this way because when you give power back to the person to trust their own intrinsic wisdom in their bodies, just incredible things can happen, so that's what's most meaningful for me.
So you said you're an eating psychology coach.
Yes.
What's your background? What's your skills, experience, that type of stuff?
Yeah, sure. So I have a master's from the University of Pennsylvania in psychology and education, and I ended up getting an internship at the Office of Health Education there, where I learned a lot about behavioral change and supporting people with, I actually worked with drugs and alcohol on campus, and I did intakes. Mm-hmm. And then I moved to Boston because I met my husband, and I moved here and ended up working at a national health and weight management company for 13 years, almost 14 years, where I facilitated classes and I supported people. It was a very aggressive, medically supervised weight management program. So essentially, I was doing, obesity treatment, bariatric treatment. However, I found that there were a lot of things lacking in the program. I started to wonder, if I was really helping people because, yes, they would lose weight and they would get healthier, but we were not approaching any of the deeper root causes of why people felt called to overeat or to binge eat. And what I would see is a lot of recidivism, meaning people would lose a lot of weight, but they weren't given any tools really to understand why they were eating in the first place. So after a while, willpower can only last for so long, right? And I would see people start to gain this weight back and feel very frustrated. And I started to feel there's got to be something more. I'm very interested in psychology and behavioral change, but I wanted to understand and have it come from this different place where we could really heal from the inside out one's relationship with food. So I found this amazing program. It's called the Institute for the Psychology of Eating, and got my certificate there. I also got a certificate in, it's called MBE, which is Mindfulness-Based Eating Awareness Training, and I got a certificate in Mindful Eating Instruction. So that's essentially what my background and training is.
Yeah, that sounds a lot like what I see as a dietitian a lot of times too. There's a reason why we eat when we're not hungry, mm-hmm. right? And so how do you, when you're coaching people, when you're working with them, how do you help them to do that? I mean, you can talk a little bit about the mindfulness stuff, but I also kind of just want to know, how do you get into that deeper part?
Yeah. So, I don't market myself as a weight loss coach or dieting coach or anything like that because I try to help people. A lot of people come to me and they're like, "Oh, I just want to lose weight." And I'll say, "Well, what do you really want?" well, I want to lose weight. And I said, okay, but go deeper. Let's really like, what does the promise of weight loss give you? What do you want? Well, I want to go sailing again without feeling self-conscious. I want to, get on the ground with my grandkids. I want to feel good in my clothes. I want to feel good in my skin. I want to move my body in a way that feels good. You know what I mean? So when we start to look at those things as opposed to weight loss, we're actually getting to the heart of what makes people happy and balanced. And that's what I do. I go deeper because it's not weight loss. I mean, weight loss may occur anyway when you're happy and when you're like, living an aligned life and you're doing pursuing the passions that you have. And, a lot of times people that I work with, there's something off balance in their life, whether it's like connection and community, or if it's spirituality, or they're not pursuing passions, or they're in stress response all the time. And food becomes this really important, takes on an even more important role. Like it almost plays a surrogate role for a void that they're experiencing in their lives, right? So when we can sort of identify what that is and start to tune in and talk about those things, then oftentimes food becomes much more about what it really is supposed to be, which is nourishment and pleasure. And so that's what I do. And you have to, of course, build a certain amount of trust beforehand with your client to be able to go there. And, I get into sexuality, I get into relationships, I get into spirituality and things, all aspects of somebody's health, because it's really a holistic way of healing somebody. And then I also do a lot of like behavioral modification, but in a really heart-centered place. I'm not like this, okay, you do this and then tell me by Friday that you do, it's not like that. It's more like, how can we identify what your habits are around food and your food scripts and start to, short circuit those, or like rewrite the story, rewrite the script, and give people empowerment around their choices. And then a lot of also what I do is stress reduction techniques, because a lot of what causes people, particularly to binge eat, is being in a stress response. And I often say to people, like, imagine you've just gotten the most amazing massage of your life. There's, aromatherapy, there's soft music playing, you're totally relaxed. You're not going to jump off that massage table and start binging on Doritos. Like most people, when they're in a relaxed state, will not feel called to binge eat. So I work with people on mindful eating techniques, and I actually go do like one-on-one exercises that support people with learning their satiety cues and their hunger cues in a way that they've never even understood before, which is very powerful because we're so used to being distracted when we eat. We're driving, we're watching TV, we're reading, or whatever, we're working. And when you can really tune in to food and have a sense of gratitude and abundance around food, it can be extremely powerful and pleasurable.
Jenny, I love what you just said, because it's really, we attribute so many things to food, like, oh, I'm excited and happy, I'm going to eat, or, oh, I'm unhappy, I'm going to eat.
It's Flag Day, I'm going to eat.
It's Thanksgiving, I'm going to eat too much. So we give food all these emotional value. We do. I love that you talk to people about disconnecting that and seeing food as the value it truly is, which is nourishing your body, but it's not necessarily going to heal your mind to eat, 6 Dove bars. But when you were talking, I was thinking, what are some of the food scripts you mentioned that people have? What are some of those that you see really commonly that maybe the listeners would identify with?
Yeah, absolutely. So once you start to tune into these, you're going to be like, oh, yeah, I totally do that. And part of it is our own food scripts, and part of it is outside food scripts. So like one example is you're, after a long day, maybe you put the kids to bed, you sit down on the couch with your spouse or your partner and you start watching a show, right? And all of a sudden a pizza commercial comes on, and that is a cue for you to go grab some food or order a pizza. Or perhaps every time the game is on, you grab some snacks. Like that's a food script. That's something that you follow. It's almost like instinctive. You're not even putting much thought into it. It's just like, okay, go. Or maybe like one of my food scripts that I identified was every time my kids were fighting, I would be so stressed out And I started to notice I was heading for the cabinets to eat chocolate chips or whatever. And once I realized that, I'm like, oh, okay, my food script is like whenever my kids are fighting, it makes me anxious and stressed out. And my food script when I'm stressed out and anxious is to go eat something like pleasurable, right? Or junky. And once I started to recognize the actual and isolating the emotion that I'm feeling and how that leads to overeating potentially or eating foods that I really don't need in that moment, I started opening up an more expansive way of dealing with that stress. So instead of heading right for the cabinet, I do like a stop, look, and listen technique. Like, oh, okay, I understand what's happening. Let me go upstairs and listen to some music and like just lie down for a few minutes, calm myself down. Right. So that's what it is. It takes extreme awareness because these food scripts lie within all of us and these cues, but we're so on autopilot. And it's comes from like a very base part of our brains, like this called the basal ganglia, which stores all these habits, right, that we have. And unless we start to bring them to the surface and start to short circuit them or create a new pathway, we're sort of destined to follow them over and over again.
So they're kind of, some of them I imagine are even created when we're really young, like our parents, oh, you're not feeling good here, have something to eat. Or, I always on Sunday, well, I find it funny that we tend to eat popcorn, like in my family when we're watching certain shows. Like if you go watch a movie, you're going to pop a thing of popcorn and sit there and eat it.
Yep.
Versus whether you may have just had lunch, you're not really needing that. So yeah, that's
a food script. Like you're not going to be like, oh, let's go watch a movie. Yeah. I'm going to make some Brussels sprouts. Okay. Join me in a minute.
Right.
You're not going to do that. So again, that's partially because of society, right? Because they're not selling Brussels sprouts at a movie theater. You're not getting those types of foods. So remember I said like part of it is like internal food scripts and part of it is external food script.
Yeah, I can see that really and the stop, look, and listen type thing, because we do so many things mindlessly.
Yes.
Eating in the car, eating on the run, grabbing, food, like you said, when you're watching your screen. And you're even to the point now with a lot of mobile devices where you're seeing food ads on there. So that's also driving, I imagine, some of the desires, because they don't advertise really healthy food usually. All food has value. It's just how much of it.
Right. And that's another thing that I really stress upon with my clients is that there's no morality in food. Like your Twinkie didn't just rob a bank and, your broccoli doesn't have a halo on, it's all about the meaning that we ascribe to that food. Right. So if we can divorce ourselves from this feeling of good and bad, I'm good if I eat this, I'm bad if I eat that, then things become a little less powerful to us. Because especially if you sort of adopt an abundance mindset around certain foods, whereas we usually kind of shut the door on certain foods, like that's not for me. I can't have that. I can only have this, which is very constricting. And it makes us feel like rebellious almost, like that food. Yes, like a teenager. Like, you're going to tell me not to have seconds of this cake? Well, I'm going to have seconds of this cake. And then you're like, oh, wait, I'm just sort of hurting myself, aren't I? So like I try to work with people on like, not to restrict foods, but really to start to tune in to what are the foods that make you feel really good. And there's, like you said, there's room for all foods. There's nothing like, and there's some value in all foods for the most part. I mean, there is some that is, peeps. Like, I don't know what the value is in that, but that doesn't mean you can't have a peep once in a while, right? Like it's sort of about the balance. It's sort of about, okay, if I'm going to eat peep, let me and I really enjoy it, then let me totally enjoy this and give myself permission and own this decision. But what we end up doing is feel so guilty about it that we almost dissociate and we distract and we have conflict. We're not fully giving ourselves permission to eat it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, or we eat it when nobody's looking and eat it really fast.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, exactly.
I swear Dove chocolate does not taste good unless you hold it in your mouth and let it totally melt.
Oh my gosh, that's so true. My husband likes to refrigerate all his chocolate. I'm like, Honey, that's beside the whole point. It's supposed to melt in your mouth.
Yeah, you got to get that
Right.
mouth feel and all.
Because that's how your brain gets the message that it's receiving pleasure.
Chocolate is pleasure. It's really, that's the value chocolate has.
Me too.
That's mine. We won't state that. We won't state that as a fact, but it is a strong opinion of mine. Now, I know you said you don't do losing weight. You really do kind of the mental change and stopping those kind of mindless eating. What is wrong with you? Because you said sometimes people do lose weight. So what is it that's wrong with just counting calories and exercising? And maybe it's not wrong is not the right word, but what's different or, an issue with the normal like calories in? I'm going to track, I'm going to eat 1,500 calories. I'm going to burn 2,000 calories and that's going to help me to lose weight. What's
it's a great question. And I think because we're such a dieting culture that people get really caught up in all of those things without taking into consideration all of the mind-body stuff that happens. So like your awareness, your eating rhythm, how quickly you eat, your thoughts and beliefs about food and about you as an eater. Those are all things that actually affect your metabolism, affect your gut health, affect your stress response, affect your stress hormones. And if I often tell people, like, if you're very focused on the outcome, which is oftentimes weight loss, right? You're not going to find joy in the process. And oftentimes the sustainability lies in the process of making behavioral change. So an example, I used to exercise only to lose weight, only to burn calories. I didn't really see any value in doing it otherwise. And when I started to shift and heal my own relationship with food and with my body, I would never consider yoga because it wasn't enough calorie burn. Now I love yoga because I feel really good moving that way and it makes me feel very calm. And I started to recognize that there's joy in the process. It doesn't have to always be an outcome only, because when we're very obsessed or focused on the outcome, oftentimes it's because we're doing it with clenched fists. Like we're so pushing and bullying ourselves to get that outcome that it's not sustainable. Yes, there's great value in information about calories. And I, a lot of my clients use a food log. That's fine. I think it's important because our culture certainly doesn't make it any easier to have us lose weight, right? Or eat healthy. But just one part of the story. And so I'll give you another example. I have a client right now. The first thing he said to me was like, I want to lose 30 pounds. And I was like, okay, and I said the same thing. Well, what do you really want? What can we do here? And we started to look at, his lifestyle and how he was eating, his eating rhythm. He started to recognize he was skipping breakfast, for instance, and then being ravenous later on. So that's a huge factor right there. And then I started to help him sort of identify his hunger cues a bit more and to tune into the foods that he really likes and dislikes. And I gave him did some mindful eating exercises with him. And wouldn't you know, like without any effort, and I didn't coach him on any of this, I've worked with him for almost 3 months and he's down almost 30 pounds. Just by tuning in, by slowing down, by looking at eating rhythm, by having breakfast again, thereby becoming less sort of ravenous later in the day and then potentially overeating because when you're starving, you don't care what's in front of you. You're not going to be like, oh, I'm going to make a nice green smoothie right now. But when you're starving, you will eat whatever is there. Fast, convenient. And a lot of times the fast and convenient foods are not the most nutrient dense ones. Let's just face it. So, and that's why I feel like, calories is just one part of the story. And what I'm really interested in is everything else about you as an eater.
It's funny to me because calories in and calories out do matter, but it's a matter of, like you said, it's that mindless eating. And part of when you start to write down what you eat, you start realizing how much mindless eating you're doing. That food log, if that's the only way it helps, if you don't even count, if you just write down what you're eating, all of a sudden you're like, I stop, I drink a full mocha latte full of sugar every morning and didn't realize that, that was kind of that extra calories I was getting in the day. And you're not necessarily changing that because you want to reduce the calories. You're changing it because you're like, you know what? I bet I might feel better if I didn't have so much caffeine and sugar first thing in the morning. Maybe if I tried something a little different, you try it. If it helps, you can start, like you said, changing those food scripts. Because we do have that. When you mentioned the food scripts, that really hit me because I'm like, it's not that we don't have control, but we do have to make a lot of choices. We make so many choices every day, just walking into a room. And so you get tired of making those choices. So you just kind of make
you're bringing up such
choices.
An important part. It's called decision fatigue and decision anxiety, because you're absolutely right. A lot of my clients end up eating later in the day. And part of it is because they've made so many decisions during the day. They don't want to have to agonize about their dinner, And I read in a book, I think it was Brian Wansink's book, which is called Mindless Eating. He says that Americans make 200 food-related decisions a day. That's a lot. Like how many bites and what to eat and when to eat. And, it's exhausting. And then you get home and you're like, well, I'm just going to eat whatever, I'm tired. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And, I think food logs are really, really interesting because it brings you cognizance of what you're doing. Like you said, maybe you don't realize some of the ways that you're taking in extra calories without even really knowing it or needing it. Right. And if you can make subtle changes like that and still, allow for pleasure and you're not restricting and denying yourself constantly that's a subtle way to lose weight too. The latte, for instance, like that, I had one client who was having 3 cups of coffee a day with cream, with whole, cream in their coffee. And they just made one little shift. And that was they realized it was a 200 or 300 calorie shift, just that alone.
I noticed on your information, you have a little bit of information about, I think we've talked a lot about emotional eating because that's all that kind of mindless eating and thinking through. And so is there an exercise that you could tell people to do maybe that would help them to be more mindful?
Absolutely. And in fact, I have a whole free mindful eating course. That's really a good jump start. And I can share that with your listeners too, or you can visit my website. It's up on there. But essentially there's some very basic things that you can do to start becoming a more mindful eater. And at first, it really you have to be present and conscious during the eating experience. A lot of people check out. They're multitasking. They're feeling emotional distress or conflict about what they're eating. There's a lot that makes us sort of want to dissociate from the eating experience. So just sort of saying, I am here. I am not in a rush. I don't have to rush through this meal. I own the decision to eat. I often tell people just to do that. So sit down, bringing a little bit of gratitude to eating, oh, I'm so happy I get to eat a balanced, delicious meal right now. And then some really basic things like taking some deep breaths before starting can get your body in a relaxation response. Putting your fork down, this is so basic, but I see my kids sometimes, they literally have their fork in their hand and it's close to their mouth and they're constantly sort of shoveling stuff in. And I was like, hey, we're not in a rush. Put your fork down. And even just that, it's a reminder to stop for a minute and to check in with your body. Am I still hungry? How is everything feeling? Am I enjoying this food? You know what I mean? So literally just a few times during your meal, just be conscious and decide to put your fork or spoon down, take a break, do a stop, look, and listen. How's my body feeling? It can be very, very effective. And then I often ask people to sort of envision a hunger timeline in front of them and to determine where they are within that hunger timeline. Now, there's no right or wrong answer as when to stop because that's individual for every person. But generally, around a 5 or 6 is sort of the sweet spot. You want to feel energetic. You want to feel sort of light. You don't want to feel weighed down, bloated, having fatigue, getting the distended belly. Those are signs that okay, I'm probably over that sweet spot area now, So those are sort of just some basics, and that's just a jumping off point, but that alone could help, I think, a lot of people.
On the other side of that is a little bit of binge eating or kind of that shoveling food in or whatever. You talk a little bit about that on your website. Can you talk to people how to identify if that's what they're doing, and then maybe some ideas for how to
Yeah, sure. Binge eating
change that behavior a little bit?
is a particular specialty of mine. It's something that I help people a lot with, and it's a very personal topic, right? Because people feel very ashamed of binge eating, and because of that shame and that feeling of being out of control, people often feel like there's nothing they can do about it. But the truth is, there's a lot you can do about it, and the first part of it is to recognize that you're in a stress response, and it's incumbent upon you to then let your body know that it's not in a crisis. You're not running from a lion. There's no place you have to be. So I often talk about the 3 Ds of binge eating. So it's distraction, dissociation, and dieting culture. So I'll just talk about those. So distraction leads to overeating and binge eating. Because if you're not paying attention, you're going to overeat because you're not listening to your body's cues. And then oftentimes it's too late. Dissociation occurs when it's painful to be in the process of feeling out of control. So our brains we're not dropping into our bodies. We sort of detach a little bit. And then it's almost like a wolf like swoops in and you're like, this is big craziness. And then you wake up almost and there's like wrappers all over the floor and you're like, what did I just do? And it feels very scary. And so a lot of what I do is help people to find self-soothing techniques, stress reduction techniques, relaxation techniques so that they can avoid that. And then the last one is dieting culture. So and this goes into this idea of polarities of binging and restricting. So if you have been a chronic dieter, if you've been somebody who's judged your food choices, judged your appetite, restricted yourself, gone on multiple diets, what happens is because of that feeling of restriction for so long, it's almost like a rubber band. Like eventually it snaps and you end up binging on the very thing that you've been restricting all this time. So I certainly had done that. Like there was a period in my life where I had to give up gluten and dairy, and I'm already a vegetarian. So I felt so restricted. I felt so miserable all the time. I was hanging on for dear life, trying to stay with this protocol. And then one day at our neighborhood block party, I literally lost it and I ate almost an entire pizza. Why? Because I had said no to it for so long.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like what you resist persists in a way. So that's when I do is I try to help clients have an abundance mindset with food as opposed to restrictive mindset. Because if that Twinkie, all of a sudden you can have it anytime you want, there's no restriction, then all of a sudden it has a lot less power, right? I mean, you may binge on it or like for a little while and then you're like, oh, I can have this whenever. All right, whatever. I'll have it when I really want it. You know what I mean? So that help a lot of people, a lot of the people that I work with.
Oh, good. Okay. That was great. I think you are correct with the shame thing. And I get the dissociation thing too. It's just hard because you know that it's not the healthiest thing for you to do, but you do have to kind of get a hold of it. So that's very good point. So last question for you, because we're almost to the end of our time. What's your favorite food? Tell me about your favorite food that you love to eat. Not, binge or anything like that, but something that's nourishing
so
to
this
you.
This may sound weird, but I love a great mackerel bowl of like tofu and brown rice with like a yummy, like maybe tahini sauce and like some greens and broccoli and some nuts. I love it, love it, love it. It makes me so happy. It tastes so good. I love tofu. So that, I mean, that's more of a meal than a food. And then the other thing I would say is peanut butter. I love almond butter and peanut butter so much.
Oh, I love cashew butter. I totally get that. Okay. So Jenny, where can people find you if they want to know more about you from listening?
Yeah, thank you so much. Best way to reach me and to find out more about me is to go to my website, which is www.jennyeden, that's EDEN, coaching.com.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
And I'll link to your site in the show notes. And
thank you so much. This has been so
thanks
fun
for talking with us today. Jenny, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It was a pleasure to have you on the show. I know that my listeners have learned a lot about the intrinsic wisdom that our body has. and will share with us. Well, guys, this has been another great episode of the Nutrition Experts Podcast, the podcast that is all about learning more so you can do more with nutrition in your life.
You've just listened to an episode of the Nutrition Experts Podcast. Be sure to get more information about this week's episode at www.nutritionexpertspodcast.com. Tune in next time for another great conversation with a nutrition expert and expand your personal knowledge in the field of nutrition, one conversation at a time.